The Wall That Leaped Screams. Chapter 1. The First Drop of Sound. It started with a drop, not of water, but of sound. A single, wet splatter that echoed through the hallway in the dead of night, waking me with a jolt that felt like someone had whispered directly into my brain. The clock beside my bed read 3:06 a.m. At first, I thought it was a leaky pipe. Old houses like mine had their quirks, creaking stairs, groaning walls, but this was different. It had rhythm, intent. I waited, heart thudding, listening. Drip. There it was again. I slid out of bed, bare feet meeting cold wood. The house was darker than usual. Even the moonlight through the windows seemed to hold its breath. I crept toward the hallway, drawn to the sound like it was calling me. Drip. It was louder now, coming from the wall beside the staircase. A long stretch of faded wallpaper, yellowed with time and age. I placed my palm on it, cold, slightly damp. I pressed my ear against the surface, and I heard it, a voice, not a clear one. It was like a scream muffled beneath layers of earth and plaster. Muffled but distinct, like someone screaming through a pillow. The wall trembled beneath my fingers. I stumbled back, gasping. The sound stopped. Silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, like the house was waiting for me to speak. Instead, I ran my hand along the wallpaper, and that's when I felt the bulge, a soft, swollen patch in the wall, as if something beneath the surface was pressing outward. I grabbed a chair from the hallway and stood on it, my hand brushing higher up the wall. Just above the bulge was a faint crack, thin but fresh. From it, something dark had leaked. Not red, not brown, but thick, like ink. It oozed slowly, trickling down the wallpaper. I stumbled back, chair creaking beneath me. The drop fell from the crack and landed on the wooden floor. Drip. It was the same sound that had woken me. I crouched low, examining the dark droplet. It didn't spread, it just sat there, vibrating slightly. I reached out, hesitated, and then touched it. It was warm, and in that instant, I wasn't in my hallway anymore. I was inside the wall. Darkness all around me, claustrophobic, humid. Screams whispered around me like a wind I couldn't escape. I could feel the weight of the wood, the nails, the insulation pressing in from all sides. Faces stared through cracks in the wall. Open mouths, no sound, just terror. Then it stopped. I was on the floor again, gasping, drenched in sweat. The droplet was gone. But the crack in the wall had widened, and from deep inside I heard something breathing. Chapter 2. The Wallpaper That Wept. The next morning, I returned to the crack in the wall. It hadn't closed. In fact, it had deepened, like a wound that had split further in the night. The wallpaper surrounding it had bubbled and darkened, curling away at the edges as if it, too, was trying to flee from whatever lay behind. I leaned closer. It was still damp, but this time it wasn't leaking ink. It was weeping. Thin rivulets of clear liquid ran from the edges of the wallpaper like tears. I touched one with my finger and brought it to my lips before I could stop myself. So, Tears. I staggered back, revulsion twisting in my stomach. I knew it was impossible. Walls don't cry, but this one did, and I was beginning to believe it had a reason. I fetched a small knife from the kitchen and returned. Slowly, carefully, I began peeling the wallpaper back, exposing the bare plaster underneath. The more I peeled, the more the weeping intensified. Then, something horrifying appeared. Figures. Small impressions pushing outward from inside the wall, distorting the plaster like a child pressing their hand against thin fabric. 5 of them, then 10, then more. All tiny, all moving, scratching faintly. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a lamp cord. The weeping stopped, the fingers retreated. The wallpaper, half peeled, fluttered slightly in the still air. And then I saw the writing. Carved faintly into the exposed plaster were 3 words, etched as if by fingernail. Let us out. The tears began again. Only now, they weren't clear. They were red. Chapter 3. The Scream Behind the Plaster. That night, the house seemed quieter than usual. Too quiet. I sat in the living room, lights off, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen was just some strange illusion. The fingers, the writing, the tears, none of it made sense. But as midnight crept closer, the silence took on a weight of its own. It pressed into my skin, coiled around my ribs like vines. And then, just as the clock struck 12, I heard it. A scream. Not loud, not the kind that rattles windows or wakes neighbors. This was internal. It came from the wall. I froze. The scream vibrated through the floor, rattling a glass on the coffee table. It was long and guttural, as if something buried deep was trying to claw its way out. Then it stopped. Silence again. I stood slowly, drawn to the wall in the hallway. The same one with the crack. The same one that had cried. But tonight, it pulsed. I placed my palm on the plaster. Warm. Beating. It felt like touching skin. My breath caught. I knocked once, twice, and the wall screamed again. This time louder. Roar! Agonized. I stumbled backward as the wallpaper split down the middle, revealing a sliver of something beneath. Pale, almost human. I couldn't look away. Then the plaster buckled. Tiny holes appeared across its surface. And from each hole came a whisper. Still here. I remember. He promised. I backed away slowly, hands shaking, heart hammering. And in the silence that followed, I realized the truth. The wall wasn't just hiding something. It was alive, and it had something to say. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Brickwork. The next day, I didn't go to work. I couldn't. Every time I stepped away from the hallway, I could still feel the walls pulse beneath my skin, like the memory of a bruise that hadn't formed yet. I kept hearing those voices, small, layered, overlapping, speaking a language made of grief. So I did what I thought would give me control. I tore open more of the wall. I grabbed a hammer and chisel and began removing chunks of plaster. With every blow, I expected to see pipes, beams, insulation, but what I uncovered was brick. Raw, old, uneven. and behind it, a low humming. Not mechanical. I leaned in. The bricks were whispering. At first, I thought it was just the ringing in my ears, but no, this was different. The bricks were warm, vibrating softly, and when I pressed my head against them, I could make out distinct words. "Don't stop. Closer. We know you." I stepped back, my breathing ragged. I circled the hole I'd carved, fingers tracing the edge of the brick. The whispers stopped. Then one brick in the center shuddered and cracked slightly. Red leaked through the gap. It wasn't paint. I pried it loose, hands trembling, and it tumbled to the ground with a soft thud. Behind it was a void, and within that darkness, eyes. So many, blinking, watching. The whisper returned, this time clear and personal. "Now you see us." I backed away, stepping on the fallen brick, cutting my heel. As I limped toward the door, the other bricks began to hum. And through the cracks, breath slipped out like steam in the cold. The wall was speaking, and it would not be ignored. Chapter 5. The room that held its breath. The room at the end of the hallway had always felt off. Not in a way I could explain, but in the way the air changed when you got near it. Heavier, thicker, like stepping into a dream just before it becomes a nightmare. That morning, after seeing the eyes behind the bricks, I found myself drawn to it. Drawn like a tide pulled by a hidden moon. The door was closed, as it always was. I couldn't remember ever opening it, not since I moved in. I turned the knob slowly. It clicked open with a sigh. The room was small, empty, just 4 walls, no furniture, not even dust. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt it. Stillness. The kind that doesn't welcome you but traps you. The kind of stillness that has been waiting. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to exhale, and I couldn't, not fully. It was like the room had taken something from me. I stepped further in. The door swung shut behind me. I didn't panic, not at first. I reached for the knob, but it wouldn't budge. My heart rate spiked. The silence pressed harder against my ears, and then I realized there was no sound. None. No birds outside the window, no creaking floor, no wind. The room had swallowed sound. I backed into the center and stood completely still. Then the walls began to breathe. Not visibly, but rhythmically. A pulse. Inhale. Exhale. I matched it without meaning to, my lungs filled in sync. And that's when I heard it. A voice. Faint and inside me. Stay here. Be still. Let us remember. I shouted, or tried to. No sound came out. The room was holding its breath, and it had taken mine too. I spun slowly, taking in the bare walls, the dull corners. The air shimmered just slightly, a ripple across nothing. I moved closer to one of the walls and placed my hand flat against it. Warm. And beneath the warmth, something faint. A hum, like a distant melody played underwater. Then the room changed. Shadows gathered at the base of the walls and rose upward, forming faint outlines. Children, dozens of them, still, watching. One by one, they raised their hands to the wall, mirroring me. Their mouths moved, but made no sound. One child stepped forward, her outline clearer than the rest, small, with hair in braids and a dress that flickered like static. She reached out and touched my shoulder. Suddenly I remembered a game I'd played when I was 5, alone, in a locked room, a voice whispering comfort through the wall. I had thought it was imagination, but it hadn't been. This was the room, the one that listened, and now it remembered too. The girl looked into my eyes and mouthed a single word, "Remember," and then she was gone. The shadows faded, the pulse slowed, the breath exhaled one final time, and sound returned. The door creaked open. The room let me go, but I knew I would return. Chapter 6. Cracks that echoed names. I avoided the hallway for hours, pretending everything was fine. I drank coffee, stared at the TV, let static replace sound. But every so often I'd glance down that corridor and feel it watching. When I finally returned, I found something new. The wall had changed. Hairline fractures had spread outward from the brick I removed, spider webbing across the plaster like lightning frozen in time. I approached slowly, instinctively counting the cracks. There were 12. Each one seemed to hum faintly, but the sound was inside me, not around me. And then they began to whisper. One by one. Name. Not just any names. Mine. Again and again. But not just Nora. They called me by names I hadn't heard since childhood. Nicknames. Pet names. Names my mother used when she thought no one else was listening. Each crack spoke with a different voice. Some old, some familiar. One sounded just like my father, another like a friend I'd lost. And then one whispered a name I didn't recognize. Elise? I stepped back. The wall pulsed. Elise, louder now, from every crack. Elise, urgent, pleading. Then a face pushed forward, not fully formed, just an impression beneath the paint. It was a child's face, eyes closed, mouth open like it was mid-scream. I dropped to my knees. "Who are you?" I asked. The answer came slowly, painfully. "You knew me before?" The cracks deepened, and from inside them I heard sobbing, not of pain, but of relief, because someone was finally listening. Chapter 7. The Hollow Behind the Hollow. I didn't sleep that night. Even with every door locked and light on, I couldn't unsee the cracks, couldn't unhear the voices. My house was no longer a place of rest. It was a witness, a storyteller, and I was no longer its owner. I was its audience. Just before dawn, I returned to the hallway. I don't remember deciding to go. I just stood up and moved, like something had called me and I was obeying. The cracks had deepened. The plaster curled like dried skin. In the center of the wall, a small wooden panel I'd never noticed before had been exposed. Rough, out of place, like someone had covered it up and the house had spit it back out. I reached for it. It didn't open easily. The wood groaned, resisting me, but I pulled until it gave way with a snap. Behind it wasn't insulation or wiring. It was another wall, and behind that, something hollow. I tapped on it. The sound echoed. Not like normal echo. This was delayed, distant, as though the sound had to travel through more than space, through time. Then it tapped back. 1, twice, 3 times. I pressed my face closer to the small opening and whispered, "Who's there?" No answer, just silence. And then a sigh. Long, slow, grateful. I looked around for a flashlight and returned with a narrow beam of light. I reached into the gap and aimed the beam forward. The space stretched farther than the house should allow. A tunnel, a chamber, I didn't know, but I saw it. A small handprint pressed into the wood. Fresh. And beside it, a single word carved deeply. Help. I should have closed it. I should have walked away. But instead, I whispered back, "I'm here." Chapter 8. When the screams turned to words. That night, I couldn't sit still. The word help burned behind my eyes, etched into my thoughts like a stain I couldn't scrub away. I paced the living room, lights off, waiting for something to happen, and deep down, knowing it would. It came just past 2 a.m. A scream, louder than any before, tore through the wall like a lightning bolt through silence. I clutched my chest, breath stolen by the sheer force of it. But then it shifted. It wasn't a scream anymore. It was speaking. The voice that followed was fractured but deliberate, like a person learning to use words again after years of silence. It came in gasps, in fragments, but I heard it. Trapped, buried, beloved. I ran to the hallway. The wooden panel from before now lay on the ground, ripped from its hinges. The hollow behind it pulsed with a reddish glow, faint, flickering, like the light of a dying candle. I leaned in again, flashlight shaking in my hand. The tunnel had changed. It looked deeper. The handprint was gone, but in its place were letters, scrawled with dirt, with something darker. Find my name. A sound behind me made me spin. My bedroom door had creaked open on its own. Inside, on the mirror, written in fog though the room was cold, were the words. It was Elise, the name from before, the one the cracks had whispered. "Elise," I said aloud, and the entire house groaned, like it had exhaled. The voice in the wall whispered again. Yes, then silence. But this time it felt thankful, like a scream that had finally been heard. I stood there for several minutes, barely breathing, letting the quiet settle over me like a warm blanket. The tension in the air was gone, replaced by something gentler, not peace yet, but the beginning of it. I stepped into my bedroom and stared at the mirror. My reflection was hazy in the cold glass, but my eyes were clear, wide with understanding. I reached out and touched the foggy message. It melted beneath my fingertips. "Elise." I whispered it again, softer, like an apology and a promise rolled into one. And then I heard something that froze me. A laugh, faint, childlike, somewhere within the walls. I returned to the hallway. The glow in the hollow had faded, but there was something new. A breeze, a soft wind brushing against my face from deep inside the tunnel, carrying with it the scent of old flowers and dust. A presence passed through me, a memory that didn't belong to me, but felt like it did. Elise wasn't just a ghost. She was a memory this house had clung to. And now, with her name spoken aloud, she was finally free to speak back. I knelt, pressed my palm against the frame of the hollow, and whispered, "I'm still listening." And in that moment, the house hummed. Love, stay alive, and no longer alone. Chapter 9. The Child Inside the Wall. I couldn't sleep. After saying her name, Elise, the house seemed to settle, but that didn't mean I did. I kept picturing that handprint in the hollow, the carved plea for help, and the echo of her voice beneath my floorboards. I returned to the wall just before sunrise. The reddish glow had faded, but the panel remained open, the void yawning like a wound that refused to close. I slipped my hand into the opening, then my arm, feeling around. My fingers brushed something soft, fabric. I pulled. Dull, old, stained, stitched with crude black thread. One button eye missing. Around its neck, a faded tag barely clinging on. I turned it over. Elise. The name was stitched in careful cursive. My hands trembled. And then I heard her. Not from the wall, from behind me. I was waiting. I spun around, heart in my throat. The hallway was empty, but the air was colder. I looked back at the doll. It was damp now, its fabric soaked in something dark. My flashlight flickered. Then I saw the wall begin to ripple, like something was moving through it. A small hand pressed against the plaster from inside, then another, then a face, faint, like looking through frosted glass. A child, face of. Her eyes opened and locked with mine, her mouth moved. I couldn't hear it, so I placed my palm where hers was, skin to wall. And suddenly I could. She whispered her story, not with words, but with images, feelings, flashes of pain, of being forgotten, of screaming with no one to hear. A child, buried not in dirt, but in silence. And now, she was done being quiet. Chapter 10. The Voice That Remembered Me. It began before I was fully awake. A whisper at the edge of my dreams. Not threatening, familiar. Nora. I sat up in bed, blinking into the pale light of early morning. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. The air had a strange weight to it, like a storm was building, but not outside. Inside. I walked toward the hallway, drawn again by instinct more than choice. The panel was open. The hollow gaped wider than ever, breathing a soft heat into the cool air. "Nora," the voice said again, clearer, closer. It wasn't Elise. It was me. My own voice, older, tired, but mine. I stepped closer. The hollow tunnel behind the wall pulsed with light, shadows dancing across the surface like flame behind frosted glass. I knelt and leaned in. The voice came again. "You left me here." I froze. The words struck somewhere deep and unguarded. My childhood flashed before me, rooms I'd forgotten, moments I'd buried, and I remembered the dreams. I dreamed of this place long before I found it. Before the cracks. Before Elise. I used to draw it, a wall that breathed, a voice in the night, a girl behind it. I had known. I crawled into the hollow, flashlight held in one trembling hand. The tunnel twisted, and with each turn my pulse matched the strange cadence of the voice. It whispered memories. Mine, Elise's, merged, overlapping. It knew what I had forgotten, and it wasn't accusing me, it was mourning. I paused inside the tunnel, letting the silence stretch. I closed my eyes and listened, not just with my ears, but with my whole body. A name floated through me like breath. Nora. And with it, a sensation, a memory of a little girl crying into the wall, a voice whispering back, promising that someone would return. That someone was me. I emerged into a hidden chamber, small, wooden, carved with symbols I didn't understand but somehow recognized. The air inside was different, warmer. It smelled faintly of something sweet and old. Lavender, maybe. Or memory. At the center was a mirror. Cracked. Foggy. I wiped it clean and saw myself not as I was, as I had been. A child. Afraid. Alone. Whispering to the wall for someone to come back. I had been the first voice, and now I was the last one left to listen. But I didn't look away. I studied that reflection, traced the crack in the mirror with my finger, and let the grief wash over me. Tears came, quiet and steady, not out of fear, but recognition. This wasn't just a haunted house. It was a vessel of echoes, of lost children, of promises never kept. And now finally one had been. Chapter 11. The wall that opened at night. The house had always been strange after sunset, but that night it felt different. The kind of different that presses against your skin like static. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was waiting, not in the future, but right now, in the walls. I sat in the hallway, flashlight off. I wanted to see it with my eyes, not just hear it with my ears. The wood beneath me was cool, humming faintly like a heartbeat echoing through the floorboards. It began just after 3 a.m. A creak, then another. Not from the stairs, not from the ceiling, from the wall. I watched as the panel slowly began to move. Not by force, not violently. It slid, like it had been oiled by years of breath. It opened to reveal the hollow again, only this time it wasn't empty. A light pulsed within. Faint, warm, flickering like candlelight. I crawled forward, my breath fogged in front of me even though the air was thick and warm. I looked inside. The chamber had grown. Or maybe it had always been this big and I just hadn't noticed. The walls inside were smooth, painted over with faint symbols and handprints. Dozens, maybe hundreds, some tiny, some the size of mine. Elise stood at the far end, not fully, not physically, more like a shape made of air and sorrow. She lifted her hand and pointed toward a crack in the chamber wall. I moved closer. The crack widened, and behind it was another wall. Inside that one, bones, tiny ones, and a name carved into the wood beside them. Elise Norwood, 1976. She had been here all along, not lost, just waiting to be seen. Chapter 12. The Mouth Beneath the Paint. I returned to the chamber the next night, drawn to it like gravity. Elise's bones rested behind the crack, the truth etched in wood and silence. But something else called to me now. The paint. It was different, thicker, glossy in patches, as though freshly applied. But I hadn't touched it. The chamber was dry, old. Yet beneath the surface, something pulsed. Something moved. I ran my fingers across one wall. It was warm again, too warm. And then I felt it. Breath, soft and slow, exhaling through the cracks like the wall itself had lungs. I pressed my ear against it. There was a sound, wet, rhythmic, like lips parting. Then I heard a whisper. My voice was taken. I staggered back. The paint blistered. Small bubbles formed, swelled, and then burst. But not with air. With words. Tiny voices spilled into the chamber, overlapping, weeping, calling names I didn't recognize. Cora, Matthew, Elise. Then the paint at the center of the wall split like skin. A small hole opened, round, pink, wet, a mouth, a real one. It gasped, then whispered, "You're the only one who stayed." I fell to my knees, flashlight trembling in my hand. The mouth pulsed again, then widened into a soundless scream. The chamber shuddered. The paint peeled back in thick strips, revealing hundreds of mouths underneath, some open, some closed, some sobbing silently. I reached out. "Well, me?" I asked, and they answered all together in a voice that echoed from every corner. "Because you remembered us." And then the mouths began to sing. A lullaby I hadn't heard since childhood. A song I'd forgotten I knew, and I understood. This was never just Elise's story. It was mine too. Chapter 13. Echoes that knew my secrets. I thought I knew everything the house had to show me, but I hadn't heard the echoes. They started faint, in the hallway where it all began. Just as I passed the mirror, I heard it. My own voice. Not echoing what I'd just said, but echoing something I'd said years ago. No one ever listens to me. I froze. The voice came again, clearer this time. A memory. I hate this house. Then another from deeper in the corridor. I wish I could disappear. Every sentence I had whispered to myself in anger, fear, and loneliness. The walls remembered them. They held them like scars. The house wasn't just haunted by Elise. It was haunted by me. Every room echoed with words I thought had vanished into silence. Even the wallpaper seemed to tremble with them. I stepped into the living room, and there, layered over the static hum of the wall, I heard laughter. My own, as a child. From a time before the fear, before the voices, before Elise. Then the laughter cut off. and a soft sob replaced it. I followed the sound into the old study, the one room I'd locked and avoided for years. I didn't remember why until I opened the door. The walls inside were covered in drawings, mine, crayon figures of a girl with wild hair standing beside a large wall. Always the same wall, always sealed, always cracked. I picked one up. At the bottom was a name, Elise. I didn't just find her story, I'd lived it before. We weren't strangers. We were mirrors. Chapter 14. The House That Listened. That evening, I didn't wait for the house to call. I went to it. I walked the halls like I belonged to them, because I finally understood that I always had. The walls pulsed with presence now, not menace. The cold had lifted. The silence didn't press, it invited. When I reached the hollow, the panel was already open. I stepped inside. The chamber no longer felt like a place of secrets. It was a room ready to speak. I sat cross-legged in the center, flashlight resting beside me, and closed my eyes. And the house spoke, not with screams, not with words, with memory. 100 voices layered like sediment. Elise's cries, the laughter of children, my own whispers from years ago, my mother's humming, my father's footsteps. The house remembered everything, and now so did I. The floor beneath me grew warm, not ominous, welcoming. The walls around me softened, pulsing like breath, and from them came a gentle sound. A heartbeat. Mine and hers. Together. I reached forward and placed my hand on the wall. "I hear you," I whispered. "I'm still listening." A soft gust passed through the chamber, like a sigh of relief. And then I heard it, a single voice, clear and steady. "You set us free." The walls began to glow, soft and golden, like dawn through curtains. I looked around one last time. The drawings, the names, the handprints, all fading now, not erased, released, because the house had been waiting not for an answer, but for acknowledgement. And now it had me. Chapter 15. The silence that followed the final cry. It didn't end with screaming. It ended with stillness. The kind of stillness that only arrives when something long awaited has been fulfilled. That night, the house didn't breathe. It didn't weep. It didn't echo. For the first time in weeks, it slept. And so did I. When I woke the next morning, the air felt different, lighter. The hallway where it all began now carried warmth instead of dread. The cracks had sealed. The whispers had stopped. The panel was gone. Or maybe it had never really been there at all. I walked from room to room in silence, listening, waiting, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. I whispered thank yous to the corners, to the walls, to the spaces that once spoke in sobs and screams. And though nothing answered, I knew I was heard. I reached the study and found the final drawing, one I didn't remember making. A child and a woman standing together, hand in hand, in front of a whole wall. No cracks. No screams, just sunlight, In the corner of the page, scribbled in red crayon, were two names, Elise and Nora. I smiled, tears slipping down my cheeks, not of fear, but release. But I wasn't quite ready to leave. Not yet. I sat down on the living room floor, legs crossed, palms open on my knees. I let the quiet fill me like breath. It was no longer empty, it was sacred. The air shimmered with a kind of presence, like Elise was still there, watching, not trapped, but at peace. I imagined her twirling in the sunlight, no longer behind walls or paint or screams, just free. I stood, walked to the kitchen and placed the old doll, her doll, on the table. I braided its hair gently and tied it with a red ribbon, a parting gift, a promise kept. Before I left, I wrote a note and tucked it into the hollow, which had somehow returned, slightly ajar. For those who remember, for those who listen, you are never alone. I closed it gently. This time, it stayed shut. I left the house just after noon, locked the door behind me, not to trap anything in, but to keep the peace inside intact. The house had done what it needed to do. It had remembered. It had spoken. It had healed. And now, in that sacred silence that followed the final cry, so had I.